Occultism and Mysticism by J Van Der Leeuw, read by Dave Marsland of Cardiff Theosophical Society. Occultism and Mysticism. It is interesting to see how the essential difference and mutually supplementary character of philosophy and science are evident in their respective extensions into mysticism and occultism. It is in modern theosophy that we find the clearest presentation of these two, especially of the latter, occultism. The claim of occultism is that this physical world is not the only world which can be investigated scientifically. It teaches that there are worlds of subtler matter which can be explored scientifically by those who have developed the faculties of perception in those worlds, what we might call the occult senses, such as clairvoyance at different levels, clairaudience, and other similar faculties. There is nothing improbable or impossible in an extension of sense perception beyond the limits of our normal five senses. It is common knowledge that even within the range of the usual senses there are appreciable differences with regard to the limits of perception. Some will hear a more rapid vibration of the air as sound, or see a more rapid vibration of the ether as light than others. Apart from the greater sensitiveness in ordinary perception, there is the evidence of so-called transposition of the ordinary sense functions to almost any part of the body. Thus, Richer tells in his work 30 Years of Psychical Research of the case of a person who, in a state of hypnosis, had the faculty of sight temporarily localized in the fingertips, so that she could read a page of print with the hands instead of with the eyes. This and similar experiments point to the possibility of sense perception without the use of the ordinary five senses, and to the existence of a sixth sense not dependent upon the physical sense organs. We ourselves in ordinary life cannot fail to come across instances where a knowledge of events is obtained when there is no sense evidence whatsoever to provide it. The knowledge of the illness or death of a friend far away, of an accident or catastrophe taking place at a distance, or even of an event to take place in the future, is thus obtained by means of an inner sense which transcends the five physical senses. Finally, there is the evidence of those who claim to have developed consciously senses not normally developed in man, but presumably capable of development by those who follow the necessary training. Only with a more widespread development of occult faculties can occultism become science, the science of worlds of matter, subtler than the physical. Meanwhile, we must classify whatever is produced along lines of occult investigation as belonging to the domain of science rather than to that of philosophy. Like science, occultism is the investigation of an outside world or of outside worlds in their multiplicity of forms and colours, presented in dimensions of time and space. As such, it is the observation and investigation of a world image. As ordinary science explores the physical world image, so does occultism attempt to explore an etheric, astral or mental world image. It therefore has the same possibilities and limitations which science has. It leads to a knowledge of the how, not of the why of things. It leads to knowledge and control of the outer worlds, not to knowledge of ultimate principles. Occultism, as little as science, has an answer to give to ultimate questions. It may show us the working and functioning of things, the how, somewhat further than ordinary science can. It may show the way things appear in a world image beyond the merely physical world image, but essentially it is not the task of either science or occultism to answer final questions. To expect such things of them is to misunderstand their mission and their possibility. We do not expect an electric lamp to produce music or a piano to give light. Each has its own power and value, and it would be ignorance on our part and not insufficiency on theirs if we expect the wrong thing from them and they fail to supply it. It is important to understand this, especially where, in modern theosophy, the claim is so often made for occultism that it offers a philosophy and answers the problems of life. It does not offer a philosophy of life any more than science does, and if we expect occultism to answer fundamental problems, we misunderstand its function. Occultism offers an extension of science into the subtler worlds, mainly the world of emotions and the world of thought, but its investigations are investigations of a world image, not experience of reality. This does not in any way belittle the scope of occultism. It merely corrects a misunderstanding which leads to absurdity. There are many occasions when the interesting and valuable products of occult investigation are mistaken for philosophical truths and presented as answering ultimate questions. This confusion is detrimental to the development of occultism, since claims are made on its behalf which it can never fulfill. Occultism has no more an answer for such problems as the nature of evil, the freedom of the will, the justice of life, or the relation of consciousness to matter than science. If we would pursue these metaphysical questions, we must follow a different line. Just as in modern theosophy, we find occultism or psychism presented as an extension of science, so do we find philosophical mysticism presented as an extension of philosophy. The fundamental doctrine of theosophy, that of the unity of all life, belongs to this domain of philosophical mysticism. No clairvoyant investigation at whatsoever level can ever observe the unity of life. In its philosophical mysticism, theosophy trans intellectual speculation and leads to the experience of reality. In this it shows its kinship with Neoplatonic mysticism. Plotinus too proclaimed that it is possible for philosophy to be more than an intellectual structure, that it is possible to experience as inner realities those things which ordinary philosophy would present as intellectual beliefs. Thus he says, Plato says of unity that it is unspeakable and indescribable. Nevertheless we speak of it, we write about it, but only to excite our souls by our discussions, and to direct them towards this divine spectacle, just as one might point out the road to somebody who desired to see some object. Instruction, indeed, goes as far as showing the road and guiding us in the way, but to obtain the vision of the divinity is the work suitable to him who desires to obtain it. End of quote. Intellectual philosophy may come to the conclusion that there is a world of reality of which our everyday world is but the image produced in our consciousness. Philosophical mysticism goes one step further and claims that it is possible for man to enter that world of reality and experience living truth. Again, not content with recognizing, as some philosophers do, that in our normal consciousness we are subject to illusion, philosophical mysticism claims the power for man to conquer this illusion and establish himself in reality. Thus, where philosophy believes, philosophical mysticism experiences. It transcends belief in being. In this way, philosophical mysticism is as legitimate an extension of ordinary philosophy as occultism or psychism is of ordinary science. It is interesting to see how the evolutionary tendencies of modern philosophy are towards this philosophical mysticism, even though it may not be mentioned by that name. The recognition of the intuition in Bergson's philosophy as a method of knowledge beyond the intellect, the impatience with intellectual systems of philosophy into which life is expected to fit, and the attempt at a philosophy which is creative, vital, and based on experience, such as we find in the work of Count Kieseling, the interest of many philosophers in the new mathematics, so evident in Bertrand Russell's work, and finally, a definitely mystical philosophy like that of Ouspensky in his Tertium Organum. All these are signs of the gradual evolution from a merely intellectual philosophy into a philosophy of intuition and experience. In modern theosophy, it is through its aspect as philosophical mysticism that we must approach ultimate questions. The doctrine of theosophy with regard to the illusion or maya of the phenomenal worlds It's teaching that the goal of life is the attaining of ultimate reality, which can be reached by a process of inner realization. Above all, its doctrine of the unity of life and of universal brotherhood. All these belong to Theosophy as philosophical mysticism. As such, it truly offers a philosophy of life. As such, it leads to the experience of the mystery of life. As such, it may help us with regard to problems such as that of the ultimate justice of life, the origin of evil and suffering, or the relation of life to form or of soul to body. But as such, it does not and cannot ever answer questions with regard to the detailed forms of our world image, whether physical, emotional or mental. This detailed knowledge, as well as the knowledge of the way in which things work, belongs to science and its extension, occultism. In theosophical literature, there is as yet no clear understanding of and discrimination between these two aspects of its teaching, the occult scientific and the mystic philosophical, and consequently we often meet with philosophical heresies on the one hand, where the results of occult investigations are produced as the answers to philosophical questions, and scientific heresies on the other hand, where questions which can only be answered by a precise and scientific occultism are answered by philosophical or mystical statements. The result is that the true values of theosophy are obscured both in the eyes of the scientist and of the philosopher, and that the progress of theosophical investigation is impeded. It is curious to see how through history the scientific and philosophical type, and also the mystic and the occultist, have misunderstood and even opposed one another. The age-long struggle between religion and science is rooted in that misunderstanding. A misunderstanding accentuated when religion became a dogmatic orthodoxy and science an equally dogmatic materialism, such as they were a century ago. It is curious to see how through history the scientific and the philosophical type, and also the mystic and the occultist, have misunderstood and even opposed one another. The age-long struggle between religion and science is rooted in that misunderstanding. A misunderstanding accentuated when religion becomes a dogmatic orthodoxy and science an equally dogmatic materialism, such as they were a century ago. In principle, we find the antithesis of the two main types already in the disapproval on the part of Plotinus, the philosophical mystic, of the writings of the Gnostics, whose tendencies were definitely in the direction of occultism. In more recent times, we find a similar, though more open warfare between the philosophical mysticism of the Cambridge Platonists of the 17th century and the occultism of the Rosicrucians and alchemists of that period. When we study the series of polemical pamphlets interchanged between Henry More, the Platonist, and Thomas Vaughan, known as Eugenius Philalethes, the famous Rosicrucian, we are struck not by the misunderstanding of each other's methods and contributions to knowledge, but by the ill-concealed bitterness and the mutual contempt which even the titles of their pamphlets manifest. Yet both were men of outstanding nobility of character and erudition, and seeing the extent of their antagonism, we can well imagine what would happen in the case of lesser representatives on both sides. We must learn to see the two, philosophy and science, as well as their extensions, mysticism and occultism, coordinated in a higher unity without confusing their characteristic methods and aims. The methods of science and occultism will ever be accurate observation by means of our senses and the intellectual elaboration of these sense data. The method of philosophy and of philosophical mysticism will ever be that of the intuition or realization in consciousness. And it is that method of realizations which we shall have to use in our explanation of the world of the real.